So in the last video, we talked about just the basics of slope. In this video, we're concentrating on how to find the slope when we're given 2 points that are on the line, okay? And you could also do this if you were given a graph of the line. You could just pick 2 points that are on the line and you could do the same thing to those points, all right? So if you have to find the slope, we talked about in the last video, there's 2 ways to do it. You can, so remember slope, they use the letter M for. You can think about it in terms of rise over run if you're looking at the graph, or you can use that formula, which is where you take your Y values and subtract them, and then you put it over the X values where you subtracted them, okay? So from here, I'm gonna show you how to use the formula first, and then I'll show you how you can also look at the graph and tell pretty easily too, okay? So if we're given 2 points that are on the line and we have to find the slope, well, the first thing I'm going to do is label my points. So this is an X value, that's a Y value. So I'm going to label that with an X and a Y. And then to distinguish between them, just like I talked about in the last problem, I'm going to label this as like my first X and Y value. So I'll put a little 1 as the subscript there. And then with this one, this is like my second X and Y value. So I'll label this as an X with a little subscript of a 2 and then a Y with a subscript of a 2, okay? And that'll help me to label them, okay? So when I'm finding the slope, I'm gonna plug it in this formula. So it's take the Y2 minus the Y1, and then I'm gonna put it over, I'm gonna take the X2 value minus the X1, okay? Now, you can think of it like this and you can plug it in the equation and it'll work just fine. The way that I think about it makes it a little bit simpler so that I can organize in my head and not make as many mistakes, okay? So the way that I kind of think about it is I just have to make sure that I subtract my Y values on top and then I subtract my X values on the bottom. The only thing you have to be careful with is whichever Y value, whichever coordinate you start with the Y value, you have to go back to that same coordinate when you go to the bottom, okay? And so if I'm starting with my second point, make sure you put the Y value first on top. So I'm gonna start with that Y value. So I have to take that minus, so go ahead and put your minus, the other Y value. So my other Y value is -3. So 9 minus -3. Okay, then from there, that's going to be over. Now remember, like I said a second ago, whichever coordinate you start with, you have to go back to when you go to the X values, all right? So because I started with this one, when I do my X value, I'm going to start with the -8 on the bottom. And then remember, it's that minus the other X value. So my other X value was 2, so it'd be -2. And then you just simplify. So we've got 9 minus a -3, so minus a negative becomes a positive, and then I have 9 plus 3, which is 12, and then on the bottom, I have -8 minus 2, so -8 minus 2 is -10. And then you have to simplify, you have to reduce, so I'm going to find a number that goes into both of those, and ideally you want to try to find the biggest number. If you don't find the biggest number, you can just keep finding a number that goes into both of them until you're done. But I noticed, like for instance, I noticed that 2 goes into both of them. So I'm going to divide 12 by 2 and I get 6. And then I'm going to divide the -10 by 2 and I get -5. And then I'm going to see, is there a number that goes into both of those? And there's not. So then that's my answer. And now typically we'll put the negative, if there is a negative with it, with the top number or out in front, but that would be the slope. Okay, so that's using the formula. With number 2, if you wanted to do it with a graph, you could grab a piece of graph paper or you could just graph it by hand to the side, and you could think about it, instead of using the formula, you can think about it in terms of rise over run, okay? So what you'd have to do is graph those 2 points. So I'm going to graph 3, 4. So remember, this is my X, that's my Y axis. So 3, 4, I'd go 1, 2, 3, and then up 4, 3, 4. So that point would be right there, and I'm going to label it just so I know where it's supposed to be. And then I have 5/8. So now I didn't give myself enough room. So I'm going to draw this so that I have enough room. I'm going to label it that way so that since everything's positive. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that one's right there. And then I'm going to label my other one. So I've got 5/8. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then that was 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So that one would be right there. And if you did this where you had a grid paper, it would be a lot easier. So if you have something that has grid to it, it would be easier. And then you do the rise over run. So what that means is you're going to start at one of the points. It doesn't really matter which one. I usually start at the one that's kind of to the left. And I'm going to figure out how much do I need to go up or down, and then how much do I need to go left or right to get there. So the rise part is the up or down part. And then on the bottom is my run part, which is how far I go left or right. So if I'm going from this point to this point, I'm going to start with the rise part, and I have to go up to get there. So I'm going to go up, and now you can count. So this is 3. I'm starting at 3, or excuse me, I'm starting at 4. Excuse me. That's on the y-axis. Sorry, that's why grid paper's nice. So you start at 4, and then I'm going to go up to 8. So I go from 4 to 8, and you can count. So count the spaces if you're going there. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 7, 8. Make sure that was right. So if I'm at 4, I'm going to go up 1, 2, 3, 4 to get there. So from 4 to 8 is up 4. So that's a positive 4 because I went up. So the rise would be a positive 4. And then the run, that would be how far I go left or right. And I have to go to the right, so that would be positive. And I'm going from 3 to 5. And so if you look, I'm kind of looking at my X values too. From 3 to 5 is just 2 spaces. And since I went to the right, that's a positive 2. So my rise over run, I went up 4 and then right 2. So it'd be 4 over 2. And when I simplify, I get 2. So my slope would be 2, okay? And again, you can use the formula. If I used the formula, it would be 8 minus 4 over 5 minus 3. So that'd be 4 over 2, which I get the same thing, okay? So that's how you do it with a graph. And like I said, if you had grid paper, it would be much easier than trying to count on the board, all right? So then the next one, let's use the formula again. So if we use the formula, like I said, you're going to subtract your y's and then put it over, you subtract your x's. So I'm going to start with this one first. My y value is 4, so it'd be 4 minus, my y value here is 4. And then on the bottom, I start back with the same point I started with. So that'd be 3 minus, and then my x value there is 1. Okay, so then 4 minus 4 is 0. 3 minus 1 is 2. And then 0 divided by 2, there's a lot of people that get this kind of mixed up as to what that is. Some people are like, oh, you can't have a 0 on top. And then some people think it's the opposite of that you can't do. It is okay to have 0 on top. This is kind of like asking yourself, how many times does 2 go into 0? And it doesn't go at all, so that would be 0, okay? And in a minute, I'll give you a way to remember that part, all right? So then the slope here would be 0. And if you graphed those, you'll notice, you'll notice that it would be 0 because the 0 is that flat line that I was talking about in the other video. So if I graph this, it'd be 1, 2, 3, 4. And then the other one is at 3, 4. So 3, 4. If I drew a line through those points, it's a flat line. So if you graphed them, you would notice that it's a flat line. So the slope would be 0. Okay. So this last one, if I'm finding the slope, take the y values and subtract them. So it would be 2 minus 6 over, and then since I started with this one, I'm going to go back to this one. With the x values, it'd be negative 1 minus whatever that one is, which is negative 1. Okay, then I simplify. 2 minus 6 is negative 4 over Negative 1 minus a negative, remember, becomes a positive. So that'd be like negative 1 plus 1, which is 0. So now this one's a different scenario than the last one I had. Now, this time the 0 is on the bottom. It is not okay to have 0 on the bottom. So if you end up with 0 on the bottom, then that means that this is the one that's undefined. All right, so a little trick just to help you remember which one ends up being 0 and which one is the undefined one. I always think about it this way. It is okay to have 0 on the top. That's the one that gives you 0 as the slope. It is a no to have 0 on the bottom. That's the one that's going to give you the undefined slope, okay? So it just helps you to remember which one's not okay, and it kind of shows you where the 0 is. So hope that helps.